The Washington Post has released some very interesting data that backs up exactly what I've been saying this election. Kamala Harris's policies are vastly more popular than Donald Trump's, but not enough people are aware. So the Washington Post actually pulled policies separate from the candidates. So just asking people, hey, do you like this policy or not? And you may be surprised to find that even Trump supporters love Kamala Harris's policies. And some of these policies they think are Trump's policies when they were actually Kamala Harris's policies. This is both a failure of the Democratic Party and the Harris campaign to effectively get their message out there about the policies, but also a failure of media to properly communicate them. And actually, the Washington Post article, to their credit, acknowledges that this is also the fault of the media. So let me get to some of the data in here. It is so. I'm a bit of a data nerd, even though I'm not good at math. I don't know how that works, but I find this to be so interesting. So they share here support for Harris's proposals, and so each of these dots is a different policy proposal, and this is the support of them. Very few of them are underwater here, so we could take a look at which ones are least popular. That is increasing the number of refugees admitted to the U.S., so immigration continues to be a big issue for Americans. Increasing the royalties that oil and gas companies are charged to drill or mine on public lands, which increasing the royalties that oil and gas companies are charged. I don't know why this isn't popular. Why do people want to defend massive oil companies? I don't know. Repealing, it's possible they thought this meant giving oil and gas companies money, because that's kind of how this reads a little bit. But this one, repealing laws that shield gun manufacturers from being sued for violence involving guns they have made, and eliminating the filibuster in Congress in order to pass a law restoring a national right to abortion. I'm actually surprised this one. I mean, it's essentially 50-50, but I'm surprised it's even that close. I feel like that should be a lot more popular. And so 50-50 here, opposing efforts to ban race-related books and content in public schools. Again, this is a weird one. So let's be clear. Some of these, I clearly disagree with at least the majorities here of American people, or half the country. But the vast majority of her policies are in a majority of support, while Trump's are half underwater, at least half. Now, the Washington Post goes on to detail here, nearly all of Harris's proposals received majority support among registered voters. Only half of Trump's did. Funding detection technology to intercept fentanyl and other drugs at the border, that has the most support for Kamala Harris. And for Trump, eliminating taxes on Social Security income, which is a new one for him. That is now his most popular policy. There's also, in terms of least popular, I showed you the Harris's. Trump's least popular, reducing regulation on cryptocurrency. Because who is the audience for that except for the crypto people who got some problems of their own? But there's no constituency for that policy. Now, let me show you some of the other info here. So this is super interesting. So support for Harris proposals, it would make sense that when it comes to Harris voters, they love them. In terms of Harris supporters not liking a policy, shutting down the border to new entrants if an average of more than 5,000 migrants per day to cross. So this is clearly a very conservative policy that is not popular with Harris supporters. Let's see which other one here is close to the line. Increasing the number of refugees admitted to the U.S., so that has more than half support, but it's still almost half and half. In terms of Trump's, so again, Trump supporters largely support his policies, but some of the unpopular ones here, the cryptocurrency one, because again, who is that for? Reducing automobile fuel efficiency standards, because again, that's for massive companies, car companies. Funding free online classes with money taken from private university endowments through taxes, fines, and lawsuits. Interesting. I'm not even sure. I need more details on that policy. I'm not sure what these online classes are. And death penalty as a punishment for drug dealing convictions. That's an insane policy. Good to see that majority of MAGA does not support that. ending teacher tenure at K-12 public schools, and withdrawing federal approval for the abortion pill, mifepristone. So not too many surprises here, I would say, in terms of what is not popular with these two camps. But as we go through it, undecided voters. So again, it appears that Harris's policies are much more popular with undecided voters compared to Donald Trump. This one, though, is the most interesting. Trump voters are very much in support of a lot of the Harris agenda. I'm going to guess some of the top ones here are conservative. Let's take a look. Funding detection technology to intercept fentanyl at the border. It makes sense. Restricting exports to China of advanced technologies with military applications. Of course, the right is always talking about China. Investigating pharmaceutical companies that block competition. This is a progressive policy that is the third most popular among Trump supporters. Anti-corporate policies are incredibly popular across the board, which is so wild considering how much of Congress is bought by massive corporations. But these are pro-working class policies. Increasing the number of drugs eligible for Medicare price negotiations. The fifth or fourth most popular policy among Trump supporters that Harris has. And increasing funding of home care services for seniors and people with disabilities. I showed polling on that when Harris first announced that policy on The View. You can go back and watch that video. I'll link to it below this video. But polling on that is incredibly popular across the board. Of course, people want to see want easier access to at-home long-term care for seniors. So that's probably Harris's best policy, I would say, just in terms of the way it both expands Medicare and helps people. I think the expansion of Medicare, the expansion of any kind of social program is, in my opinion, a great move, both politically and the right thing to do. Now, Harris voters, there are some of Trump's policies that they like, and I'm going to guess that some of these lean more progressive, but let's take a look here. Funding research on the rise in chronic illnesses among children. That, I don't even know, does Harris not have that? This feels like something that Harris it would be a given, but of course, a lot of support for that for obvious reasons. Expanding health savings accounts, which let people set aside tax-free money for medical expenses. That's a roundabout way to address the issue in healthcare, which is really more of corporate control. But eliminate tax on social security income. So a lot of these at least sound or lean more to the center or more progressive. Requiring the U.S. government to pay the same price for pharmaceuticals as other developed countries do, which is something that there is no way Trump is doing because Joe Biden and Harris have already begun the process of doing that. Trump could have and did not. So some of this stuff that Trump is proposing, and to be fair, that Harris is proposing as well, the idea that all of this is going to get passed is not possible unless Harris has all of Congress to pass it all. And even then, there's always these political fights over each of these policies. But it's fun to see, what is popular here, what isn't popular, even among different sets of voters. So regardless, the comparison here, Trump's policies are not that popular. Now, let's take a look at the least recognized policies. This is also very interesting. So these 5 policies saw the largest share of registered voters polled attributing them to the opposite party. So as you would expect, some of the stuff that leans conservative, people thought was Trump, and it tends to be, or it is Harris, and opposite for Trump. So restricting exports to China of advanced technologies with military applications. So people thought that was a Trump policy. It's a Harris policy. Shutting down the border to new entrants. If the average, I read this earlier, people thought that was a Trump policy. It's a Harris policy. Funding detection technology to intercept fentanyl. I discussed that as well. People thought, or at least more people thought, it was a Trump policy. And then the opposite here, Trump funding research on the rise in chronic illnesses. Again, that seems like an obvious, more progressive policy, but that's a Trump policy. And free online classes. So that as well. This is just, to me, this showcases why should the Democratic Party, or at least in this case, why should Kamala Harris even try and appeal to conservative voters, when, for one, they're likely not going to vote for you anyways, because the vast majority of Republicans are MAGA. But two, even if they see a conservative policy, they don't believe it's yours. They think it's Donald Trump's. So, look, again, I'm sure Harris is shaving off some of these conservative voters. They exist. I watched that town hall with the so-called undecided voters on CNN and with Kamala Harris. And I'm always stunned at how clueless people are. So it's definitely possible that Harris is simply shaving off some of those votes, people that don't like, Trump's rhetoric, but are more skeptical of Harris for whatever reason, even though Trump literally tried to steal an election. But putting that aside, this is just, for me, it shows you why Harris should be focusing on turnout for the base. Democrats win when turnout is high. How do you get turnout to be high? You get people out who don't normally vote but would vote for you. Most people, in terms of policy, as I showed you here, lean progressive. Yet 40% of people typically don't vote. But if you can properly message this stuff and reach those voters, you can get a lot of those people, as opposed to trying to, shave off a sliver of Trump voters. Now, there's also actually a little more here. So this is also interesting. Harris sometimes fails to get credit when both candidates embrace a popular idea. So they have some examples here. I'm not going to read these off, but there are policies here where they both have them, and people just think, oh, it's just Trump. Again, going to show you, like, a lot of these lean more conservative. Why even bother when you are potentially losing people with some of these conservative policies, at the same time not gaining the kinds of voters you need in the numbers you need to take enough from the conservative side to win? It seems like a backwards policy the Democrats always try and employ, and we wonder why these races are always so close. Maybe if you actually double down on your base, on what's popular, on progressive policy, you would do a lot better. But that goes to one last thing. This is a policy that is incredibly popular among all voters that Harris should take on, particularly because she is struggling in states, or at least is very close in states like Michigan right now, where she should not be close. But young voters support the U.S. imposing an arms embargo on Israel. And we are talking all, including 52% of Republican voters, a net plus 16. And of course, Democrats at a plus 41, independents at a plus 13. This is an incredibly popular policy that Harris is afraid to even consider, despite the fact that, as I covered last week, there is a Biden letter to Netanyahu discussing the potential of an arms embargo within 30 days if the Israeli government does not commit to improving conditions in Gaza. Now, we can, of course, question if that's actually going to be put into place, because it does say in that document there may be repercussions, which tends to mean, hey, there's a door open there for there to be no repercussions at all. But regardless, it is something that now has been floated by the Biden administration. It's at least worth discussing and campaigning on for Kamala Harris, which goes to, as I mentioned, Michigan. This would be an arms embargo would go to help her in Michigan here, where things have gotten really tight since the Harris campaign took a more conservative direction to try and appeal to those Trump voters or conservative voters. But regardless, I want, actually, by the way, if you go to this link, I'll link this below the video, you can take the quiz yourself. And, it won't tell you who is behind each policy. I think there's like 125 policies, but answer them all and then see where you lean on the scale. It is very interesting.